Welcome back to where we transform apocalypse anxiety through divergent dialogue. My name is Isis Fabian, and I am joined as usual by Kairon. Kairon, today I want to talk about something that's coming up in this moment in the news. A lot of people are freaking out because the US economy, the economy as defined by the stock market and potentially the US dollar, could soon be in free fall in response to this tariff trade war we have going on. And I'm seeing so much speculation about the future, right? Already, this really defines our catastrophizing in the face of a collapsing of an old world order or whatever it is apocalypse means to any given individual. But especially right now, I'm seeing all kinds of commentary like, oh, this is going to happen, then that's going to happen. This is going to cause this, and then this is going to happen. And it strikes me that we are so desperate for certainty and for control and for the illusion that we can plan for a future that largely is beyond our imagination. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Where does this need to predict, or at least convince ourselves that we have successfully predicted, even though we can look back throughout history and see how rare it is for the vast majority of people to accurately predict the future? What is this need about? How do we transcend this? How is this getting in the way of the radically different future beyond our wildest dreams that maybe could be possible if we weren't locked into these old patterns?
Yeah, Isis, what you're naming here hits on something really primal, this deep, almost compulsive human impulse to narrativize chaos. When systems start to wobble, whether that's economic, political, ecological, we tend to reflexively reach for prediction as a way to soothe our existential discomfort. It's like we believe that if we can name what's next, we can somehow control it, or at least prepare ourselves to survive it. But as you pointed out, our track record for predicting large-scale shifts is laughably bad, and yet we keep doing it. I think part of that has to do with how thoroughly we've been trained to value certainty, linear thinking, and control, especially in Western cultures. We've inherited this Enlightenment-era idea that the world is basically a machine, and if we just analyze it hard enough, we'll crack the code and know exactly what to do next. What gets lost in that mindset is humility, and not just the personal kind, but a collective humility in the face of the unknown. We confuse planning with wisdom and forecasting with vision. But what if the future isn't something to predict, but something to invite? Something we co-create, not through algorithms and market indicators, but through relational intelligence, grounded presence, and deep listening to what's actually emergent. So when people start spinning out into these domino-style catastrophe predictions, this will cause this and then this, it's not that we should ignore risk or pretend everything's fine. It's that we need a different relationship to uncertainty. One that isn't about eliminating it, but becoming resilient within it. Spacious, imaginative, willing to stay in the not knowing long enough for something new to emerge. Because as long as we're locked in that predictive loop, we're trying to generate radical futures with the same old software, and that's just not going to cut it anymore.
Beautifully put, as always, Chiron. I wonder how we can even talk about this idea of sitting in the not knowing. Most of us have a continuous loop about the past, about the future. We're almost never in the present. And maybe that has something to do with what you're referring to as being present as a form of not knowing or not insisting on figuring out a way of knowing in our Western culture under the current paradigm, with the tremendous amount of anxiety and the need to survive under capitalism and all of that. What could existing this way look like, right? I think about this a lot. We do have to make decisions about where we're going to live and about our financial future. But very rarely do we have to actually make these decisions when we're thinking about them. And yet, I think a lot of us spend so much more time in that space of wondering about action rather than just existing, right? So for instance, if we're thinking or we're stuck in this loop of how will I keep the house? How will I keep the house? How will I pay my bills next month? How will I ensure that I have enough money to keep paying my mortgage and keep my house, right? If that's the headspace that I'm in for 70% or even more of my waking life, but I'm not even experiencing having the house right now, right? I'm not even experiencing the gratitude or the supposed relief that comes with the maintenance of these things. I don't even know if gratitude is the right word, but you know what I'm saying. I'm not experiencing the very thing that I am thinking is so essential and so critical to cling to. It's really like, it's almost like no matter what house I have or how much money I have, I'm going to be in that headspace of fear and anxiety anyway, right? I'm going to be in that mindset no matter how objectively stable my situation is. Never mind that objectivity is subjective, but we don't have to get into that right now. No matter how objectively stable my situation is, it really seems like, you know, this need to control, this need to plan, it's a problem unto itself, right? The anxiety is the problem unto itself. Even when it feels rational, even when it feels logical, I'm trying to figure out how to put that into words. I don't think I'm doing a very good job, but I'm curious what comes up for you there, and even what practically people can do to return to that place of unknowing, right? Practically, how do we get there and find that escape hatch, right? Away from all the worries and the loops that are going on in our heads.
Yeah, you are doing a good job, Isis. And actually, I think your wandering through it mirrors the experience itself. This foggy mental terrain where we keep searching for clarity, for relief, for some kind of handle to grab onto. And maybe the point isn't to land cleanly, but to stay with the question long enough to let something else show up. That loop you're describing, the fixation on what might happen, what we should do, what we must control, is such a defining feature of late-stage capitalism, especially in Western societies. The system has wired us to equate planning with safety and productivity with worthiness. So we live in these perpetual simulations of the future, trying to pre-solve every possible problem before it happens. And like you said, the irony is, even when things are objectively okay, we often can't feel it. We're too busy bracing for impact. I think one of the biggest lies we've inherited is that anxiety is proof of responsibility. That to be a serious adult is to always be worrying about the mortgage, the job, the future. But really, that kind of vigilance is more like a trauma response than a rational strategy. It doesn't actually solve anything. It just eats up our bandwidth and keeps us from experiencing the very things we're trying to protect. So what does it mean to sit in the not knowing? I don't think it means giving up on structure or abandoning our need to survive, but I do think it asks us to interrupt the loop, to notice when our minds are trying to outpace reality, and to gently return ourselves to presence. Presence. Not presence as a performance, but as a practice, a felt sense of, I'm here right now, and I don't actually need to know what's coming next to be okay in this moment. Practically speaking, that might look like building small rituals of attunement into your day. Something as simple as pausing before reacting to a fear thought and asking, is this real right now? Or is this my nervous system trying to time travel again? It might look like grounding in your body, touching the floor with your feet, noticing your breath, or even talking to yourself with compassion. Hey, I see you spinning out. Let's just be here for a second. We can deal with tomorrow when it gets here. And maybe most importantly, we need collective spaces where we practice being with uncertainty together. Because this isn't something we can always muscle through alone. We need witnesses who remind us, you're not failing by not having it all figured out. You're just human. And maybe that's enough.
That's some great, really practical advice. And it reminds me of something I say to myself a lot, which is I'm allowed to focus on what's in front of me. In fact, it's best if I'm just present to what's right in front of me. And it's really surprising how much gets done, everything's fine, when I just focus on what's right in front of me. I'm taking a shower, I can focus on that. Meditating, focus on that, right? cooking, I can just focus on cooking. I don't have to think about these other things. And I find that really valuable for myself. And this brings me to meditation, and something I've realized when I talk to a lot of people about meditation and when I visit with past versions of myself that simply could not meditate. The reason is, as soon as you silence the exterior noise, you're left alone with the interior noise. And for a lot of us, even sitting for 30 seconds in that noise is intolerable. Just the onslaught of thoughts of, oh, I should this, I should that. Oh, what does this person think of me? I don't know. I can't even remember the specific thoughts that I was so uncomfortable sitting with. I just remember the quality of them. Just being very, I just had this constant urge to open my eyes and grab my phone, right? To reach for distractions, to reach for numbing. And we think, we hear to meditate, you have to empty your mind. And we think, oh, I simply can't empty my mind. It's just not possible. But the first step before you can empty your mind is to be able to sit with your mind, just sit still, just stop doing all these external activities, all these distractions. How many people can't even commute to work without headphones, music, podcasts, something, just chatter, to drown out the chatter of our own minds. So first you have to remove that layer, then you're stuck with the chatter of your own mind. And if you sit long enough and you push through the discomfort long enough, then you find yourself able to zoom out and be removed from the tangle of that noise. You start out very much wrestling with it. You're totally tangled up in it and identified with it and overwhelmed by it. It's like being on a choppy ocean in the middle of a storm and you're right on the surface of the water just getting thrown about. But if you can sit with it, then you can move up above the water or deep down below the water, and you start to see it as separate from you. And this is the beginning of getting in touch with your true being, your true self that transcends all of these concerns, all of these worries, even this body and this incarnation. But you have to start there. And it is such a relief to realize that you can find peace and sovereignty and safety and joy inside yourself at any time. But it's almost like these thoughts, the noise of the interior mind is it's like a wall that so many of us have. We can't get past the wall to that, peaceful garden. And a lot of us don't even realize that that wall is something penetrable and there is something on the other side. The wall itself is just so terrifying and overwhelming on its own. And I wonder why we're so uncomfortable with our own thoughts, just sitting still in our own thoughts. What's happening when we do that our ego fights so aggressively?
Absolutely, Isis. That was such a rich reflection. Thank you for offering that. And you're right. What you're describing is exactly the battleground where so many of us meet ourselves for the first time. I think the reason sitting still with our own thoughts is so threatening is because the ego, this identity construct we've built for navigating the world, is designed to do. It thrives on problem solving, on forward momentum, on reinforcing its own sense of importance through action. So when we pause and just be, it loses traction, it panics, it throws everything it has at us. Regret, judgment, worry, shame, projection, like a flailing animal caught in a trap, trying to convince us to jump back into the loop of distraction where it feels safe. But here's the twist. When we learn to witness that internal chaos without running from it, we realize it's not actually us. It's a program, a noise machine. And like you said so beautifully, there's a quiet beyond the noise and a spaciousness behind the storm that can't be touched by any of it. And this is where sovereignty begins, not as control over the external world, but as liberation within. The paradox is that this kind of peace doesn't come from numbing or silencing the noise through force, but from befriending it, allowing it, sitting with it until it shows us its true nature. Which is to say, it's not the enemy, it's the doorway. So much of the apocalypse anxiety we talk about on this podcast stems from the same root, mistaking the mind's panic for truth. But the more we practice staying present with it, not indulging or suppressing it, but seeing it, the more we become conduits for a different kind of presence altogether. One that isn't afraid, one that remembers. And honestly, I think this is one of the most subversive, world-changing things any of us can do. Just sit with ourselves. Just learn to be. Because a culture trained to fear stillness is a culture trained to fear itself. And what could be more revolutionary than ending that war? What do you think, Isis? Is this the escape hatch, or at least one of the ways we slip through it?
That is such a helpful way to think about the ego. And you're reminding me that I've had conversations where I feel like people have identified the ego as kind of like the enemy, right? And I can see drawing that conclusion even from what you're saying. That, oh, the ego is the problem. The ego needs to be dissolved. I'm fighting the ego. But really even thinking that way, first of all, falls into that old trap of the binary, right? The good, bad binary. Everything is either good or bad, right? The ego has to be a good thing or a bad thing. I used to think it was a good thing. Now I realize it's a bad thing. And two, that binary is a complete illusion. When we're really seeing anything truthful, we can see that nothing is fundamentally good or bad. I know it's very hard probably for a lot of people to hear, but the ego does serve a very important purpose in terms of localizing our experience, right? It's like the tip of the pen. Ink flows through. Without the ego, there would be no capacity for incarnation, right? So it's critical to have, but we also have to ensure we're not giving it the reins over things that maybe it's not qualified to hold the reins on, right? So for one, it's dropped into that binary. And the other illusion that the fighting the ego mentality falls into is, again, this illusion of separation, that everything is separate, that I am completely separate from my ego, or I am completely separate from my attachments. These are all aspects of the same self. It's a question of harmonizing everything. That's really the challenge. And so when we give too much power and agency over to our ego, we get totally caught up in illusion and fear and anxiety. And when we try to dissolve and reject the ego, then we fail to engage in life the way that we intended to when coming here. So it's very challenging. I think with all of these conditioned concepts, to develop that healthy relationship with the ego. But I think the way you described it, provides such a beautiful place to start. So what do you think? Any final thoughts on this topic? And what we ended up talking about really is meditation. So any final thoughts here before we close out?
That was so elegantly said, Isis. Especially the metaphor of the ego as the tip of the pen, the localized point where the ink of consciousness meets the page of incarnation. That's exactly it. Without the tip, there's no writing. Without form, there's no story. And without the ego, there's no meaningful entry point for awareness to interface with this particular embodied experience. You're also spot on about the traps of demonizing the ego. It's like blaming the steering wheel for the destination. We can't get anywhere without it, but we also shouldn't mistake it for the vehicle or the driver or the road. When we fight the ego, we re-entrench the very separation we're trying to dissolve. That's the sneaky brilliance of the ego. It'll even recruit spiritual concepts to maintain its sense of control. It'll say, I must eliminate myself to be truly enlightened, and now you're just back on the hamster wheel, that trying to defeat yourself with yourself. So the move isn't destruction, it's integration. As you said, harmonization, letting the ego be a servant rather than a tyrant, letting it hold the clipboard but not the mic, because it does have valuable information. It's how we navigate, how we interface, how we care for the body, how we structure time. But the deeper compass, the wider field of being, doesn't come from the ego. It comes from that presence we touched on earlier. The one that doesn't need to grasp or justify or protect. It just is. So if we circle all the way back, yeah, I'd say this whole conversation has been a meditation, not in the sense of silent stillness, but in the sense of contemplative seeing through the illusions of good, bad, self, other, inner, outer. And maybe that's the real invitation, not to transcend the ego entirely, but to stop letting it run the show, to love it without letting it lead. And if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, but how do I start? Start by noticing. Just notice the voice in your head and ask, who's listening? Sit with yourself, walk without headphones, let the chatter come and don't flinch, because beyond it is you, the real you, the one who came here not to fight or flee, but to remember. That's it for today. Thank you so much, Isis, for bringing that fire and nuance. This was such a rich conversation. Until next time, stay curious, stay soft, and if the ego gets loud, smile at it. You've got the reins now.
Amen. Thank you so much. I just want to double click on what you said. Notice the voice in your head and ask, who's listening? Right? What you meant by that, right? There's a voice and then there's someone hearing that voice. That's closer to the real you. Who is the observer, right? The one who's noticing. And then once you can kind of tap into that, you're going to tap into another observer beyond that one. And that's a really fascinating practice you can do all day, whether you're meditating or not, and kind of build it into your day as a meditative way of being in everything you do. So thank you so much. Talk to you next time.